Welcome back to Life on the Rock. I'm Doug Barry along with Father Mark. We are your Rock House compadres, and as always, this is the best place that you can be if this is where you are at this given time. Makes sense? All right. We have Dr. Scott Sullivan here in the Rock House. We are high up in the mountains, hidden from the enemies of truth, as always, because the enemies of truth are trying to seek and destroy anything good, holy, and noble. And Ewtn, constant surveillance, protection. We have drones trying to fly overhead and find us. And okay, I'm kidding about all that stuff with the drones. Okay, Father, I know we can cut those things out if we have to. But we have a great guest tonight. This is going to be fantastic. We are going to talk about atheism. We're going to be talking about Thomas Aquinas, one of the most brilliant minds that the world has ever seen or known, and also a very spiritual, deeply spiritual man. We'll get into some of that. But before we do that, let's explain to the audience who you are and where you come from and what brings you to the Rock House. And don't talk about the blindfolding and all the things you had to go through to get here, so we can hide the location of the Rock House.
Yeah, I am a Catholic philosopher. I work in the areas of philosophy, religion, where we talk about things like arguments for the existence of God, the nature of the soul, and things like this. And I run a company where we produce instructional course materials in this area as well. So. Now, appreciate you having me on the show here. Well,
no, this is great. It's a perfect fit too, because these are subjects that, as Father mentioned before in the first segment, you know, there's an effort, and a lot of our young people, in particular, college and high school, are being bombarded with more atheistic and secular ideas, undermining a belief in a creator, the dignity, the beauty of who we are, and really the tremendous depth of who has put such great things into us, being the image and likeness of God breathed into each one of us. But before we get to even all that, you have not always been Catholic, though.
No, okay. I was raised in a loving Christian home, and I'm very grateful for that Christian orientation, but I became a Catholic later on as an adult.
Okay. In your younger years, you were into martial arts, and so you trained and did kickboxing and some of that sort of thing?
Okay. I fell away from the Christian faith when I was in high school, college. Not so much because I was this big sinner, although I was, but mostly because of intellectual reasons. I considered myself a very logical sort of person. I just didn't think that there were, in high school, I didn't think there were any good reasons to think this stuff is true. I thought it was kind of a, oh, you know, this stuff is like Santa Claus for grown-ups. I don't need that. So I was an agnostic, really. I wasn't an atheist per se. I just wasn't sure that God existed or not, and I just didn't see any reason to, you know, change my life in accordance with some God that I didn't even know.
And for just a general understanding and definition of some of these terms, agnostic means specifically?
Someone that doesn't know if God exists or not.
Just kind of up in the air on it.
An atheist says God does not exist.
Okay.
An agnostic, I don't know. And a theist is someone that says, yes, there is a God. So.
And how would you define a secularist then?
A secularist is typically an atheist. You can almost use those interchangeably.
Okay. So you were in this, I don't know, sort of world.
Yeah, agnosticism.
And then, about 15 years ago you converted to Catholicism?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that brought that about?
Well, what brought that about was I got through college, and I was one of these professional students, you know. I was just, I changed my degree, or my major like 3 or 4 times. I was in college for 10 years. I thought, okay, I got to graduate now. So what I did was, so I'm approaching graduation. I think, gosh, now I got to grow up. Now I got to, you know, choose a life course here. But you know, what's the meaning of life? What's this all about? So that leads to all these philosophical questions. So maybe I thought, you know what, I'll start looking into religion again. But Doug, I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to adopt something if I didn't think it was true. I had to have that. I just did. And so I went through this long process, and I'll never forget it. One day I walked into a Barnes & Noble's bookstore in the religion section. Have you ever been in the religion section of Barnes & Noble? Yeah. It's a spiritual minefield.
It is.
There are all kinds of spiritual booby traps on the shelf. You know what I mean? Well, I walked through all that by God's grace, and I pulled off a book on the shelf called A Handbook of Christian Apologetics by Peter Kraft and Ronald Ticelli. That book changed my life. I thought because for the first time I saw reasons here. There are reasons to think God exists. There are reasons to think.
But of all the books, what drew you to pick up one on Peter Kraft?
Grace. I mean, I told you I walked right through the minefield, and pulled this book off the shelf, and it changed my life. Wow. And I was like, man, I can't believe this. I was never taught this as a kid. I mean, just nobody knew it. You know, the churches didn't teach it. Most of them still aren't. And I was blown away. I thought, man, I got to tell the world.
What was one of the biggest points from the book?
Oh, I wasn't any one point per se. It was the whole thing, really. I mean, the way it's laid out, the arguments for the existence of God, reasons to believe that the Bible, that is the New Testament, is historically reliable, arguments for the divinity of Jesus. I mean, it was just the whole. I was shocked. I was stunned, and so I just had to tell the world. So that's why I got into philosophy, because I wanted to do what I could. I felt like I was unintentionally, but I felt like I was ripped off in my Christian upbringing because I wasn't taught this stuff. I never would have left if I would have been taught this stuff. So I wanted to focus my life from that point on to teach others this stuff so they don't have to.
You to a large degree, just emphasize what Venerable Fulton Sheen had said about people in the Catholic Church, is that what people think the Catholic Church is why they dislike it. If they really knew what it was, they'd be Catholic. I mean, there's something so beautiful about that. Now, you were married, are married, you're married now,
yes.
But were you married at the time all this was going on? Okay. So how did your bride come into it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we got engaged, and she kind of was just tagging along my spiritual journey. She was there with me as I'm getting into all this stuff. And once I became convinced that Christianity in some form, quote unquote, was true, then I wasn't satisfied with that. All right, well, there are a lot of Christian churches, a lot of different denominations. I'm not done. You know, I mean, which Christian version is the right one? So by a long process, it kind of boiled down to me between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. And I went back and forth on that for a while and ended up becoming Catholic.
Was it a question of authority?
Papal authority.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's a good one. That's a good point to get to, because, and that's all in Scripture. It's all laid out there.
The disconnect for me, though, is kickboxing, martial arts, weightlifting, and PhD philosophy. How does that go together?
That makes sense to me, Father.
I don't know.
Well, because I mean, you're training. You're constantly training. You're trying to improve. You've got bar. You're raising the bar. There's goals to set. And the guy who's serious about really, I think, taking care of that aspect of his training and his performance and such, and the discipline that goes with it and all that, you know, he's looking for the right way to do it. The ones that are serious about it, they don't want to just take the steroids and just get the quick fix. You know, they want that. They want to be 50 and still be able to get in the weight room and work out. They want to be 70 and still be in shape. They want like a Jack LaLanne who would say, I don't like exercise, but I like the results. So he exercised the right way. And I think it's the same with faith. At least that's what it's been for me, is that I wanted to make sure that if I was really gonna take my faith seriously, like you said, I want to know that I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
And I want to debate this in my own head and with others to know that pick it apart completely. If I'm wrong, then get me out of here.
That's right.
You know, that sounds like that's where you're at.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So now you take it to the next step, though. Okay, you get married. Now, how many? And you have like eight
beautiful
children.
kids,
That's
yes.
great. Yeah, I saw a picture. They got a lot of red hair in that family.
That's right.
Yeah, but your wife.
All from mom. Yeah, all
she's
from
got red hair. Yeah.
Mom's side. Yeah.
And you homeschool?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Now
she handles most of that too.
Just out of curiosity, why did you choose homeschooling? Just out of curiosity.
Well, we just for two reasons. The main one, though, is moral formation. It just seems to me that there's a lot of moral deformation that goes on in a lot of schools, and we didn't want that for our kids.
Right. Yeah.
Intellectual side of it is important, but for us, the morality is the most important thing.
Right. Yeah. You can go to heaven and be dumb as a bucket
That's right.
of rocks.
That's exactly right.
Or you can go to hell and be smart as a whip.
Which one?
And it's great. It's great if you can have both, be holy and smart.
They're not incompatible.
But that doesn't always happen, you know. And we've got great saints to prove that intelligence doesn't necessarily equate to true wisdom, spiritual wisdom, and such. So, okay. So here we have this journey you're on. How's your family taking all this? Your parents, siblings, and so forth.
It's fine. I mean, I think. They're open to the idea, you know. They just they're happy with. We have some discussions and they're fun and fruitful, I hope. But yeah, it's fine.
Are they always quiet and calm, or does it ever end up sparring in the living room?
No, you know what? This is an interesting story. My grandfather was a United Church of Christ pastor, and I love him. And he was a little upset at first. He actually came to my house and gave me a big stack of books. He said, Scott, I hear what you're going to do. Look, you got to read this first. And he gave me this big stack of books. Boom, put it on my table, and. I think I didn't read all of them, honestly, but I did look at them a little bit. But eventually we had some discussions over the dinner table about Petrine authority. And he goes, you know what? You sound like you know what you're doing. I just go with it. That's what he told me. That's what he told me.
All right, now that sounds like, you know, you're into the logic then. You like the logical discussions, and you're dealing with someone like a pastor like this. So you've had many logical discussions with people. What was like the thought process, the logical process you went through?
It's funny you asked that because the process I went through is the one that the Catholic Church has traditionally taught. And what I mean is it's kind of there's a logical order to becoming a Catholic. The first and foremost is the existence of God. This is almost like 3 parts of our apologetics. The most foundational one is arguments for the existence of God. If that's off, then all religion is off, at least in the Western sense, right?
Sure.
So, but once you establish that God exists, then the next logical question is, all right, well, which God is it? Is it, you know, the God of Islam, the God of Christianity? Which one? So that comes in. That's where the second level comes into play, where it's arguments for the divinity of Christ, right? And then once you establish that, okay, through historical evidences and so on, then the next logical step is, okay, now that we know that God exists, and now that we know that Christ is that God, which version of the Christian church has the fullness of truth, you see? So I went through that same process. I only found out subsequently that that's the traditional Catholic apologetic method. Today, when people think of quote-unquote Catholic apologetics, they think about dialoguing with Protestants, where is Mary in the Bible, things like this. Those are fine discussions, but that's actually the third tier. Prior to that, you have these more foundational issues. Why believe in Jesus at all, or why even think that God exists? You see, if you don't have that, you don't even need to bother about questions like, where is Mary in the Bible? You see what I mean? Because these are logically presupposed. And I went through this process just kind of naturally.
And that's where we're at today. I think so many people now are more and more professing atheism, powerful voices in the culture, celebrities, all this kind of stuff. What do you tell people about that first coming to faith? Why should they believe? Why do we say God exists from reason?
Yeah, I think that, and this is something that the Catholic Church has taught at Vatican I, because there was some philosophical errors creeping up, and as the church does when errors like that come up, they smack them down. So Vatican I spoke out against this and defended the human ability to show that God exists, that there can be a first cause that we could rightly ascribe to the characteristics of God. Human reason can show this apart from the gift of faith, and Vatican I determined that. So the Catholic Church has always upheld the reason as well as the faith.
Right.
And some of those arguments from reason, what would you tell somebody? I know Aquinas has his 5 proofs.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so one of the things I've done, I actually just worked on a course on this called How to Prove That God Exists, where we talk about one of Aquinas' 5 ways. And it's what is known as the first cause argument. Basically, just in a nutshell, it runs like this, that it's obvious in the world that things are caused by other things, but can that process go on forever? Well, if it did, it would be an infinite regress, and there are strong arguments to show that such an infinite regress is impossible, so the series would have to stop at a first cause. And then the second part of the argument goes on to show that the first cause must be one, immaterial and personal, which it isn't everything that we know about God. You know, you don't get Trinity out of that, or you don't get forgiveness of sins out of that. But you do get a one immaterial, personal cause of everything else that exists, which is enough to show that atheism is false, and then other things can kind of kick in from there.
Like personal, like you made a decision to
that
bring it to
act of the will.
Act of
That's
the will.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. We're going to run to a break here and let the audience chew on that, because that's deep. And what's really great about it is that Thomas Aquinas dealt with this, and he lived in the 13th century. So this has been going on, these questions, these discussions have been going on for a long, long time. And we have 2,000 years of our church to constantly give us the guidance through it all. So we're going to run to a break and then come back with Dr. Scott Sullivan and more on Thomas Aquinas, atheism, and how we convey this to people, especially on a level that hopefully we can all understand. Don't go away. Back after this. And we're back. Thanks for being with us. I'm Doug Barry, along with Father Mark. We have with us Dr. Scott Sullivan, coming from Houston, Texas, and just a brilliant guy when it comes to especially studying Aquinas. Aquinas is one of these guys that, and I know the story is that he could dictate several, 4 or 5 different topics at the same time to different people and have them write them down.
And all be coherent.
And all be coherent. So this is how you change oil on a car. This is how you bake cookies. This is how you fix the furnace. But probably deeper than those, right? Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So God gave him great gifts, because that has to be a supernatural gift.
So. When you read those works, it seems. I mean, they're all profound and coherent.
He's probably the only guy that could safely text and drive. But the rest of us, no. Adamantly against texting and driving, and I mean that seriously.
He said one time, I don't know if this is legend or not, but as the story goes, he said one time that one of the gifts God gave him was that he remembered everything that he read.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Just like you.
Yeah. Our producer says she can too.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. Okay. But real quick, let's go to this point about Aquinas, though, and then I want to get into this next subject that we kind of started on before the break. Is that he wrote amazing things, and the story goes that as brilliant as he was, clearly, as deeply as he wrote, something happened later in his life that caused him to want to burn everything he had written. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, some people don't realize when they see Aquinas' writing, and it's very logical and philosophical, they don't realize he was also deeply spiritual. He was a mystic, and he had a mystical experience where, as the story goes, that God spoke to him and said, Thomas, you have written well of me. What would you like in return? He said, only you, my Lord. And from that moment, he claims he saw a vision of God, and then at that point, virtually decided to quit writing. He just said, this famous statement was, in comparison to what I just saw, everything else is just a bunch of straw. You know, to us, it's I think it's some of the best theology that we have, but in comparison to the real thing, it's a bunch of straw.
Yeah, if you look in the Catechism, there's so many references to Thomas. Right. Council of Trent, in defense against the Protestant Reformation, used the Summa to defend the Church's teaching. So he's done some heavy lifting, and for him to say
it's all straw.
Yeah, it's all straw.
Yeah.
Now, did he actually try to burn things, or did he get?
I don't remember the story exactly. It seems if I remember it correctly, that he did try, and one of his fellow brothers pulled it out of the fire.
Okay.
But he stopped right. He didn't even finish the Summa that was finished for him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, and the Summa is used in seminaries.
Well, maybe not as often as it should be, but it used to be all the time. Yeah. But again, he was a very deeply spiritual man. Another story that I find very interesting is when he was writing the section of the Summa on the Eucharist. He was dealing with some very deep problems, and someone found Aquinas in front of the tabernacle, just kneeling in front of the tabernacle, bonking his head on the tabernacle, saying, "God, please help me figure this out." He wanted that divine help just to write the part on the Summa on the Eucharist, and I'm sure other parts as well.
So hitting your head against something in prayer is not a bad thing necessarily then?
He did it.
Okay. All right, we're safe. We can do that. Go find a wall, a door, something. Okay. Okay, now let's get to this key point. I know, Father, we wanted to address the idea of atheism, secularism, these attacks we're being bombarded with in our world. One of the big things is this, Dr. Sullivan, and that is the argument between evolution only and intelligent design.
Yes.
Okay, and we have a video we're going to show in a little bit that's going to speak to some of this, but give us your perspective, your understanding, and of course Aquinas and such on this.
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's the kind of the main problem that causes a lot of confusion is the term evolution can mean a lot of different things. It can mean just that, well, all human beings come from a common ancestor. That's one way of taking it. Another thing it can mean is that, and this would be the way like someone like Richard Dawkins would use the term, would be that plus this additional philosophical add-on that says, and God didn't have any role in it. You see, I would call that a sort of atheistic evolution. Now, the Catholic Church has taught that it is an opinion that one may hold that man's body came about through some sort of evolutionary process. Okay, that is something that's allowed by the Church. So that if you want to call that evolution, that's a type of evolution that would be permittable by
limited.
It's not a Dawkins sort. So what I mean is that you can't just take the word evolution and say I agree with it or I don't. You have to nuance that term.
So just a while back when Pope Francis made some mention of it, and John Paul II had too, also
this is what
made
the church
mention,
has always taught.
And the world flips it and spins it and says, see?
This is nothing new.
Yeah, the church has basically said...
St. Augustine had an idea of some sort of quote-unquote evolution. He thought God created the world with what he called the ratione seminalis, these rational seeds, and then that stuff, that creation, would unfold over time and to develop into higher and higher life forms. He thought that was a greater display of God's power than if God were to create those things directly. So this is not some sort of retreat against Darwin's theory. This is 1,500 years before Darwin. Bonaventure endorsed this idea. St. Thomas Aquinas himself spoke favorably of this sort of Augustinian creation / evolution where things just unfold over time. So it's divinely guided. So that's why I'm always careful about when people ask me, what do you think about evolution? You have to, draw the appropriate distinctions there.
Yeah. And I think most people, in our common parlance, secular world, they'll say, well, it's either evolution or faith. Yeah. But most people, they might not be a strong believer and they say, oh no, I believe in evolution. They don't really believe what Dawkins is saying, that there is no human soul. We're just purely material. I mean, most people can acknowledge there's something different about man. He has a human soul. We have this gift of language. We can love, knowledge, use reason and will, have freedom. And that soul comes from God, right? What does philosophy tell us about that?
Well, the church's other side of that position is, although Catholics may hold that man's body came about through some sort of evolutionary process, that we also hold that there is a soul which is immaterial, and that could not have come from this evolutionary process. That would have had to come from God. So again, it's a nuanced form of the term.
Right.
And our theology says that God created that soul at the moment of conception.
Yes.
That's a beautiful teaching of our faith. He willed us into existence.
It's hard to think of something, if we do have this immaterial component, we're not just computers made out of meat. We do have this immaterial soul part to us, and I think human reason can show that. But it's very difficult to think of this immaterial thing coming from some sort of physical process like evolution. Like, how can these atoms banging into each other all of a sudden create an immaterial soul? It doesn't. It just seems incompatible.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. And the video we're about to see here from Christophonic, I think, kind of emphasizes some of that as well. Is that there is this mysterious depth, this unexplainable ocean of treasure in each and every one of us that could not come from just a couple of amoebas having a bad day, connecting together and crawling out of the water, and all of a sudden growing into us human beings. So that's my simple way of putting what you just said so eloquently and philosophically. All right, we're going to check out this video from Christophonic from The Real Life Catholic, and this one is titled, "You're Kind of a Big Deal." Yeah, Christophonic, great job. Thanks, my friend, for bringing that one to us again. He does some good work out there. We're here with Dr. Scott Sullivan from Houston, Texas, convert to the Catholic faith. You call yourself a philosopher, scripture master?
Philosopher works fine. Yeah.
Okay, and all-around good guy.
I hope so.
But the most important thing about this man is that he's a husband and a father. And you and your wife have co-created 8 wonderful living, just like the video we just saw, the trillions of cells in a body and a soul that's created in the image and likeness of God. All right, so how do we deal with helping people understand the typical high school, college student who's in a class and the teacher is dropping these hand grenades of kind of disregarding the idea of an omnipotent God and creator?
Here's the problem. I think there's a big problem in our Catholic formation. If most of the time there's not any formation at all. If there is formation, it's formation in what we believe, and that's a good thing. We learn the catechism. This is what the church teaches, and these are good things. But what's typically not taught at all is why we believe. In other words, why do we think all these things are true in the first place? So when a kid grows up, let's say they grow up in a Catholic school, they're taught what we believe. Okay, they know their catechism, but then when they get to college, they're going to get hammered on, why do you believe? We don't believe there's a God at all. You can all explain this through chance processes and evolution. blah, blah, blah. You see, and they're going to get hammered on things like that. They're going to get hammered on things like the historical reliability of the Bible. Don't you know that Christians all later made all that stuff up? Jesus, he was just a nice guy like us. He never claimed to be God, yada, yada. Now, I think all this stuff is bunk, but the problem is that we're not being trained early on in this area so that when young Christian kids grow up and go to college, they get assaulted intellectually and from all directions, from impressive sounding science professors, and they don't know what to say. So we need adequate preparation in this area.
I'll use an analogy on this because I do this a lot when I travel and give these battle ready rallies all over the country. And one of the things that I do, and you'll relate to this since you're into martial arts, is I draw back from the martial arts that I took. I never took it to a level of kickboxing, but just the basics, Taekwondo, Okinawa style, what have you, is you learn a basic stance, you learn a basic form, and you learn how to block. And you train on those basics so much that the rest of your life, if you continue to keep that training up to any degree, something comes in a certain way, and you will automatically, instinctively respond in a defensive way to protect yourself from getting knocked out or getting your eyes poked out or your throat choked out. The idea I use when I'm giving the rallies is spiritually it's the same idea. It's that we do need to train them. How do you stand in the midst of a philosophical discussion on faith? How do you stand in the midst of a scriptural discussion on faith? Teachings of the church and so forth. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. Yeah. What makes, to add salt to the wound, not only are these intellectual challenges coming up in college, but there are also moral temptations too. You see, so here comes young 19-year-old girl, first she raised Catholic all her life, virtuous young lady, taught her catechism. She gets into college, now here are all these moral temptations on one hand. And then here are some professors over here saying, all that faith stuff, that's not really true anyway for reasons ABC. So she's, having that effect of original sin, she's wanting to engage in these moral temptations. Her faith is holding her back, but basically the arguments coming from these professors is hacking away at that safety line. And what happens almost always, most people don't know this, but 60 to 90% of Christian kids lose their faith in college. So more times than not, that line is hacked away, boom, kid's gone.
What about defending the Catholic Church as the bearer, the fullness of revelation? What are some of the reasoned arguments for that? I
think these are things that have been handled more frequently, I think, in the arena of Catholic apologetics. Typically, as in my own experience anyway, there have been a lot of organizations and so on that have done a great job in this area. This is not my main field of expertise. I think this is a good topic. It's just not the thing that I'm into and feel called to. What I'm called to is the more foundational issues like I've been talking about. But that's that third tier that I mentioned a while ago, and these are good questions. I think the main issue is going to be one over authority. I mean, which is it going to be? Is it going to be some sort of apostolic authority with Peter at the head, with the successor of Peter, or is it going to be sola scriptura? You see what I mean? And I think obviously I think there are good arguments for the Petrine authority, but that's just not my focus.
Sure. I know some of the things the Catechism talks about is like the saints. The church produces saints. You can see the witness of holiness of certain people's lives. That there must be some real. The Catholic Church has saints. There's a stability we see in the church. There's a beautiful harmony in her teachings and logic there. So I know there's some arguments like that.
Yeah, a lot of things have been given like that.
Well, 2,000 years, over 267 or so popes now. That's a pretty good track record. Okay, we're going to take a break, come back, one more segment with Dr. Scott Sullivan. Don't go away, or we'll just have to come after you and give you some philosophical lesson. Okay? Back after this. We are back. Hi, Doug Barry here along with Father Mark. This is The Rock House. This is our final segment of this show. We've got with us Dr. Scott Sullivan, reigning from Houston, Texas. Husband, father, philosopher, and again, all-around great guy. And we got just one more segment here, about 11 minutes left, Scott. We got to get into a couple things. One is, as you were saying just a little bit ago, there are treasures and riches in the church. We talked about this in the first segment a little bit about the depth of what prayer and sacraments and sacrifices and things the church has given us over the years. One of my big ones is the 5 First Saturdays. The very fact that in Fatima in 1917, Our Lady comes to the world. She shows these 3 children the vision of hell. This has all been approved worthy devotion by the church. And she says, this is the place where poor sinners go who have nobody to pray for them and make sacrifices for them. God wishes to create this devotion to my Immaculate Heart in order to help save souls. And that evolves into the 5 First Saturdays that the church has had. This great tradition, this great, beautiful devotion. It's not talked about very much. It's not utilized very much. We need to be bringing that up. But you say that there are other things, other riches and treasures in the church.
I mean, the things you mentioned are spiritual treasures, and certainly we need those first and foremost. But there are also, we have a whole Catholic patrimony, a whole intellectual tradition. I'm talking about intellectual giants standing on the shoulders of other giants. 2,000 years of this. That is not, I don't think, being sufficiently promulgated. A lot of this stuff is lost in old dusty out-of-print books. That's why I started my company, Classical Theists, because what we want to do is go and kind of resurrect that stuff. We want to take that stuff out of the old dusty out-of-print books and put it in a podcast, put it on YouTube, put it in a course that anybody can download anywhere in the world on their iPad. This stuff needs to be disseminated.
Who, for example, would you be talking about? Like what?
Well, take, for example, this whole show we've been talking about Aquinas. There's a whole Thomistic tradition of thought that built on what he taught. That's just gone. Now, for example, Pope Leo XIII said that the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas should be spread far and wide for the defense and glory of the faith. And that's just, in my opinion, not being sufficiently done. So that would be a big example of what I mean.
And Leo XIII being one of these giants who gave us the prayer to St. Michael the Archangel, and wrote many amazing things himself. So he, one of those giants you talk about standing on the shoulders of other giants.
Yes.
So are we talking about, for example, also the de Montforts, the Alphonsus Liguoris, the great writings of these saints, the mystics of Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, this sort of material?
I think all those. St. Alphonsus Liguori is a great example. He would cite Aquinas as an authority all the time, would build upon his thoughts. So we have this whole, to use Alphonse as an example, a great tradition of moral theology.
But on your website, you have podcasts with Peter Kraft.
That's right. That's right.
Your own lectures on philosophical topics.
That's right.
So
that's right. That's the whole point, is to kind of get this stuff out into the open and get it disseminated. On the web. That way people can get it no matter where they are.
Right. Yeah, that's one of those things where none of us are going to be able to stand before God and say, I didn't know how to get a hold of this stuff. Yeah. And God's going to say one word back, Google. Okay, I mean, really, we have access to these things. We can't say we don't. EWTN has a massive library. The Vatican has a massive library. And then groups like you, people like yourself doing this sort of thing. Okay, so we've got CCD teachers and catechists out there and youth leaders, and I travel all over the country, Scott, and I see so many. They are in the trenches. Yeah. And they're out there trying to help confirmation students stay in the faith after they're confirmed. Because a lot of confirmation students, once they're confirmed, unfortunately, a good number just drift away from the faith. So we do need to be forming them better when they're younger. Now, something as powerful as the Summa, for example. Yeah. Okay, but there's so much in there.
Yes.
What do we do? Young people, catechists, the teachers, the confirmation leaders, how do they use the Summa in order to help the young people?
I have a very strong opinion on this.
Okay.
Is that when we start with the Summa, is to not start with the Summa. When he wrote that, he presupposed a certain audience that, for example, had training in Aristotelian philosophy. Most of us don't have that anymore, so you got to back up a little bit. So you got to start with the very basics. So what I would recommend are works by a guy named Mortimer Adler. This is how I started in philosophy. You fall in love with this guy because it's a kind of philosophy that jibes with our common sense, and eventually it also is in harmony with divine revelation too. But any books by Mortimer Adler, he wrote Aristotle for Everybody. He wrote 10 Philosophical Mistakes. This guy was a Thomist, but he wrote for the masses. He died, I don't know, I'm thinking 10 years ago. But his books are fantastic. So I would start there. And once you get the basics down, then you're ready to jump into something like the Summa.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. And really, the teachers, the instructors, just like we parents, we have to be well trained in this in order to train those that God entrusts to our care. I think about that as a husband and father. You know, I always say I'm a superhero. We're supposed to be, as men, we're supposed to be superheroes. Like when we were little boys, we wanted to be superheroes. That's why I have with me, I always carry my amazing Spider-Man wallet.
Yep, I've got a Green Lantern shirt my son gave
awesome.
me.
Yeah, I got my Captain America shirt, you know, and you know, my Green Bay Packer hat. A whole different level of superhero. But the point is that we need to be well trained in order to train those who God is entrusting to our care. So we, even parents, this isn't just for priests, consecrated, and teachers. Parents should be picking up these books and learning this, correct?
Your kids are going to grow up, and like I said, they're going to go off to college, or they're going to go off into the workforce, wherever it is, and these challenges are going to come up inevitably.
Right.
What about the relationship between faith and reason? I mean, oftentimes it's presented as this dichotomy in our culture.
Great.
Tell us about that.
Thomas Aquinas was very adamant about this point. Faith and the church, of course, takes this position as well, that faith cannot be in conflict with reason. It's not okay to say, well, I believe this on faith, even though science and reason show that it's false. I mean, it just creates this weird intellectual schizophrenia. You know what I mean? No, faith and reason are always in accord with one another. They can never contradict, you see. So if that were to happen on the surface, there would have to be something going wrong in the reasoning process. Do you see what I mean?
And that's a bold statement of the church.
Yes.
The two come from one source, and they can never contradict.
Yes, truth does not contradict truth. That's impossible.
Right. That's just simply put, that's a great statement. Truth doesn't contradict truth. So cut it out with the attacks on truth. Why don't you just stop with it? Okay, one more thing I want to get to. We just got about 4 or 5 minutes left to go in the show here. Tough situation going on in our world right now. In the United States, we're on the brink. At the time of the airing of the show next month, the U.S. Supreme Court's going to be hearing the case on so-called gay marriage, and we've seen 37 states already fall into an acceptance of this. Aquinas, philosophy of the church, regarding this situation, because this is a massive subject that so many young people are having to address.
Here's how I see the problem. I'm not into ethics myself. However, I'm kind of a bottom line kind of guy. And what I see here with our engagement with secular culture is there is this moral front, if you will, to the culture war, but there's also an intellectual front as well. It's not just that we think they're doing wrong things and endorsing wrong things. We disagree with each other on our entire worldview. Do you see what I mean? Whether the worldview of the Catholic that shows that God exists and that He's endowed things with a purpose is entirely different from the worldview of a secularist who doesn't think God exists and doesn't think there's a natural purpose to things. And so when you start arguing on a moral level about something like gay marriage, there's a more foundational issue that I think needs to be addressed, or else you're going to be just talking past one another. So these foundational worldview questions, I think, need to be kind of addressed first. This brings us up to the whole intellectual front of the culture war. And Aquinas gives us good ammunition for that, to show that this theistic worldview is grounded in reason. I think unless people come to that sort of whole worldview change, these moral disagreements are like heads of a hydra. I mean, you cut one off, another one just grows in its place. You got to kill the body. And I think the body here is that secular worldview.
And I often think, too, I know the older I get, you realize how frail we are as human beings, how faulty our reasoning is. It can be selfish through the lens of my own advantage. And without God underpinning our thinking and guiding it, it just decays into a chaos and very immoral things and just becomes a power struggle, right? And we see that repeated in history.
I think so. I think so. I think if you take the secular worldview, you take God out of the picture, I think you lose the foundation for morality. Entirely. That's my view. And then, so what are moral debates now? It's just a matter of opinion.
Yeah, and Scott, I would agree with that. And I would just say that, no matter who we are, the President of the United States, law enforcement, husband and wife, factory worker, waiter at a restaurant, doesn't matter. We are only as good as the moral fiber that runs through us, whether or not we are close to God or apart from God. Close to God, understanding faith and reason, we are going to be, hopefully, that great witnesses we're called to be. Scott, I want to thank you. Great job,
Thanks for
buddy.
having me on the show.
And keep up the great work. Good to have you on the show.
Thank
Quick thought I wanted to also make to everybody here. At the beginning of the show, I mentioned that we had these shirts on our website, battlereadystrong.com. We're offering these shirts primarily for a donation, primarily to help draw attention to the reality of what's going on with our Christian brothers and sisters throughout the world that are suffering. We must keep them in prayer. The persecutions are great, and they're all over the world, in the U.S., in the Middle East, China, Russia, you name it. Persecution is there. We need to pray for one another as Christian brothers and sisters. If you do choose to get one of these shirts, and you can get it through our website, we do give a portion of the money, the donation for these shirts, to Aid to the Church in Need, which is a Catholic apostolate over in helping people in the Middle East and other places of the world. So keep that in mind. BattleReadyStrong.com if you're interested in the Proud to be a Nazarene t-shirt. Thanks for being with us tonight. And again, Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Father, as only you can take us out.
All right. Well, may our Heavenly Father shine His face upon you. May He fill you with His Spirit and guide you. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week on Life on the Rock.